For our final session of the April 2024 Widening the Pipeline virtual training, we're going to hear a voice from America's Heartland. Ty Rushing is the chief political correspondent with Iowa Starting Line, which is one of the digital publications of the Courier newsroom company. Ty broke barriers as the first Black reporter editor at 8 Iowa print publications across the state. Throughout his journey, he's done everything from writing about his experiences as a Black man from Kansas City adjusting to life in Iowa to producing evocative features about key issues in the state. In 2022, Ty wrote, produced, and directed the film Telling Our Own Story, Ending Racism, in conjunction with Iowa PBS. The documentary was actually nominated for a 2023 Upper Midwest Emmy. And you can read all about Ty's background and journalism expertise on our website at nationalpress.org. Ty, thank you so much for joining us today.
Of course, and I appreciate the illustrious introduction.
Well, so when I reached out to you and asked you about the possibility of joining us, you were actually in an Iowa Senate hearing. So I thought before we get into your background and get some details about who you are, tell us about what you were covering that day.
Honestly, I can't even remember because like every day is so different covering the legislature because I'm covering both chambers. So I'm covering the Iowa House and the Iowa Senate. And so I can't even tell you what I was covering last Wednesday. Like I knock these stories out and I move on because the day before that, I was covering the Iowa Senate's debate on a bill to ban pesticide manufacturers from being sued in Iowa unless the company is owned by the state of China or the Chinese government. So you got a little bit of xenophobia mixed in there with like crony capitalism. So that's kind of a wild bill to be covering to like, ban litigation against these pesticide companies that are being accused of giving people cancer with their product. So that's what I was covering on Tuesday. Wednesday, yeah, it is. I am drawing a total blank. I mean, this has just been it's been a wild session here in Iowa. Other things I've covered this year, there's a bill that passed both chambers to outlaw the fake labeling of meat products. And the people in control of our government apparently believe that companies are intentionally mislabeling fake meat products to trick meat consumers into buying them. So when you see like those vegan chicken nuggets or whatever, that's like chicken, CHIK apostrophe N, apparently they believe that meat consumers are being tricked into buying these things, and we have to take legal actions to prevent that from happening. Another bill that's still kind of hanging out there is one to arm teachers in the classroom. And per a suggestion from the NRA, you won't be able to figure out the identity of the staff members who are armed in school buildings. So,
Oh my gosh.
yeah, it's been a session here in Iowa.
I bet it has. Well, so let's start and give us a baseline of learning a little bit about your journey in journalism. You started out, where did you go to college? And tell us about your journalism career.
Yeah, so I went to Kansas City, Kansas Community College originally, and then from there I went to the University of Missouri, Kansas City. So I'm like Kansas City born and bred, and then I didn't, I never stayed overnight in Iowa until I got my first journalism job. So while at Kansas City, Kansas Community College, I worked for the student newspaper. I eventually became the sports editor. And then at UMKC, I wrote about sports and I wrote columns. So didn't actually have much government coverage or like hard news. It was like all sports and opinion stuff. And so when I got my first job, it was my first opportunity. And I remember doing the interview because I was like, I still wanted to be a sports writer coming out of school. And they're like, well, actually, we're going to have you cover education. We're going to have you cover agriculture. And I wound up covering like other local government entities, as well as veteran affairs. So like all of these things that like, I can write, but like I don't have as much expertise in them as I do with sports. But, I was hungry for that opportunity. So I was like, all right, let's go.
What
And
was that first publication that you worked for?
publication was the Newton Daily News. So at the time, it was a 5-day a week paper in Newton, Iowa, a town of 15,000. The county is 36,000. It's about 30 minutes east of Des Moines. So I was just like, all right, bet, like, I'm graduating, I'm moving to Iowa. And
I have to ask you, as someone who has been the first Black staffer in so many of my early job situations, what was that like for you as an African American man moving in those spaces early in your career?
yeah. So honestly, my situation is gonna be different from yours because you have racism and misogyny to deal with, where it's like I only got one of the two. So not as bad. Obviously still bad, but like it was quite interesting. So like, all right, the reason my full name is Tyren, but I go by Ty because when I was applying for jobs, they didn't really like, those black sounding names. I couldn't even get an internship. So once I started going by Ty professionally, like that opened up a lot more doors for me. And so, when I was like applying for jobs and stuff, like when I like applying for jobs, like I was like, make sure Ty rushing, all that sort of thing. And so Newton was actually pretty awesome for a first job. Like, obviously my family was pretty terrified about me moving to this small town in Iowa. I had some concerns in the back of my mind as well, but it was just kind of like, hey, I'm gonna go wherever I gotta go to get this chance. Like, this is my dream job, this is my dream industry. And I'm gonna do what I have to do to get this opportunity. So I went, and yeah, my newsroom team was cool. Everyone was very welcoming. The community was welcoming for the most part, and like I really didn't have many bad experiences in Newton. One thing that was kind of interesting is that, like, Obama was in office when I got that job, and there were a lot of people who assumed that I knew Obama. So people who will be upset with Obama will personally tell me about it. Like, I'm gonna see Barry at the next Black people meeting and relay their messages. Like, hey man, Joe from Newton said you were messing up, Barry. You got to get on top of this. So I always thought that was funny.
What year was that?
This was 2013. So
Oh.
like because I actually covered his second inauguration from like from a watch party in Newton. And so other funny aspects of it was like, when I would go to school sometimes, like, the kids knew I was somebody important, but they didn't know who I was. And I got called like every Black celebrity you could think of.
Yeah,
I
the
think,
first time I went to Montana for a journalism meeting, I was Whoopi Goldberg wherever I went. So I, I get you. Um, so you say that you didn't necessarily go to be a political reporter. It's just something that happened. So tell us about your very first experiences moving in those circles of interviewing local politicians or going to the state house or whatever.
yeah, I mean, so the thing about Iowa is that everybody becomes a political reporter at some point because of the caucuses. So you're gonna have these people who are coming through, and they're gonna hit your small town, no matter where you live at, to try to speak and present themselves to voters. So like you're always gonna have that opportunity. So that right there kind of gives you that national experience right there, no matter where you are in the state. But then, when you're at a local paper, local politics is what matters most. So, you're going to go to these city councils, these school boards, these county supervisors meetings. And then that's kind of where you like, you get to hone your chops a little bit. And so I was very grateful for that because, I never cover school board meetings now. And like I would probably cringe if I go read one of my 2013 school board stories because I thought I was writing, I thought I had to write about every single thing that was taking place at the meeting. And, obviously as I got better and more experience, I realized, no, what is the most important thing that happened at the meeting? If I was going to tell my friends about what happened at this public meeting, what is the thing that I will relate to them? And that's how I had to think about that for my readers. Like I had to think about that for their sake. Like if they want to look at the minutes, they can look at the minutes. But if they really want to know what transpired in this meeting or how it's going to affect them, that's what the story needs to be about. And so, you learn that, you get better at that, you hone your skills, you kind of, you have to build your relationships with these local officials. And like, I honestly feel like the level of accountability at the local level is higher than it is at the state level because, I say this all the time. Like, when you cover the city council, especially in a smaller community, you're going to see the mayor, you're going to see that council member, you're going to see that city administrator, you're going to see these folks you're writing about all the time. And not just at like, some function, you're going to see them at the grocery store, you're going to see them at the football game, you're going to see them walking down Main Street, you're going to see them at church if you go. Like, so, you got to make sure if you're reporting on something they said or did, that you are 100% accurate and that you are confident in your reporting and your sourcing.
So this is an interesting set of conversations that we're having because we started with Tolu Olorunnipa of the Washington Post. He was born and raised in Tallahassee, Florida, did most of his early career as a political reporter in Florida at the State House. Now we have you as an African American man reporting on politics in Iowa. Uh, and I've told several people that I've visited Iowa many times and always felt pretty much felt comfortable and didn't experience racism. What I'd like you to try to address is um, why you think Iowa is a place where an African American journalist can feel comfortable. Why you didn't have those problems that Tolu told us about, which was outright racism that he experienced.
Yeah, I mean, well, because like Iowa has a for a long time, Iowa was a very purple state. In recent years, we've become a very red state, which it drastically changes how social situations play out. But like for a long time, not only was Iowa a purple state, but like it was ahead of the curve on a lot of social issues. Like there was never been like slavery wasn't a thing here in Iowa. Our schools were desegregated well before they were desegregated nationally. There's a strong history of Black civil rights leaders here. One of MLK's last visits was to Grinnell, Iowa. I'm actually wearing a sweatshirt for that college right now. So like there's been a strong history here of civil rights and progressive issues. Like, for example, Iowa was the third state in the nation where gay marriage was made legal. So like they've had this long history of things, and we're kind of sliding backward, as we just have this like, very Republican controlled government, and they just like, everything is getting, framed under this lens of woke and DEI and CRT, which, they use all these catch-all terms when, they're basically talking about diversity, when they're talking about like, okay, Latino people, Black people, LGBTQ people, like they just use these little terms to put in front of them. And so you're seeing a lot of that. You're seeing a lot of pushback on that. You're seeing folks in the state legislature try to, eliminate DEI from the state college programs. Like you saw that successfully happen in Florida. I think Alabama was next. And like they're trying to do that here in Iowa too. So you're just seeing a lot of this pushback, and like we've seen so much more pushback too since 2020. I always say like we had one summer of having real actual conversations about race and racism in this country, and white folks are like, nope, that's enough of that. And you started seeing all these rollbacks from like that little bit of progress we made for those couple of months.
Well,
And
there's part of that translated into something that, again, Tolu talked about, which is walking into settings and having people automatically feel like you're just here because you're the affirmative action hire, or making the assumption that you don't really know about these issues. Have you ever had that experience?
so sometimes I'll play that up, where I'm like, I'll feign a little ignorance on a topic or subject, because if they think they're smarter than you, they're going to give you more information. They're going to like, okay, well, this, that. And, they're going to get too loose with their lips. So sometimes like I'll play into that. But for me, I walk into these spaces like, because I worked in rural Iowa where like I wouldn't see another me for days sometimes. And so I go into every room with my head held high. Like, like, yeah, I'm in this space. I deserve to be in this space. I earned my way to be in this space. Like, nothing was handed to me. And, a lot of times my work and my reporting spoke for itself. And so then I'm also 6'3" and like 300 pounds. So like, I stand out in these places. So like, it'd always be kind of interesting talking to one of my bosses, because he'd be like, he would just like, he like his big thing was like he'd go to these, kind of contentious political meetings and just hang out in the back and just, be a fly on the wall. And it's like, I'm like, that doesn't work for me. Like, I can't be the fly on the wall. Like, I'm gonna go in somewhere and all heads are automatically turning to me. And I'm just gonna like, I'm just gonna look right back at you. He'll hit you a little smile and go do my thing. And so, like, I've tried not to let that, being the only person who looks like me being in these rooms intimidate me or dissuade me or prevent me from doing my job. Like, uh, yeah, you just gotta go through, power through, like, act like you belong.
I admire you so much for that, because I have to tell you, my family was terrified for me when I moved to Florida and found out I was covering a little small rural town. And this was in 1986. And so um, the carrying that lived experience, and I don't know what your early life experience was in terms of racism, but for mine, it was quite traumatic. And so learning how to engage and interact and carry yourself in such a way that it doesn't affect you is very powerful. So I applaud you for that. So let me ask you to talk a little bit about Iowa Starting Line. Tell us about that publication and how long you've been working with them.
Yeah, so it'll be 3 years in June. So it was originally started by my boss, Pat Reinard, as kind of a progressive news outlet in the state of Iowa that was going to cover the caucus, that was going to cover state politics. And so we joined the Courier Network in 2021. And so we basically try to be like we're a progressive left news organization. And we cover state government, we cover like local issues, and we try to do a mixture now. So like started off, it was like extremely political politics focused. Like it felt more like a kind of like an all insidery type of website. Whereas like now, we have stories about the best breweries in the state, or best places to go get a book, or best books by Iowa authors. So we're trying to get more of a lifestyle balance in there to go along with all the political stuff. And so like we kind of call that approach, we're giving you a little bit of candy so you come and eat the vegetables, which is all the stuff I have to write about with policy and politicians and things like that. And then we're social first. So that's what's been really unique, is that like none of our stories have paywalls, but we're social first. So like, for us, if we got a graphic with the pertinent information from the story or the tidbit about whatever we want you to learn, we think you should learn about or hear about, like, we don't mind if you just only, look at the Instagram graphic or look at the video or something like that versus like coming to the story to read the website, because, we like the eyeballs, but we don't need the eyeballs. And we're not, because we're not dependent on ad revenue. So that's been really, really unique. We've really taken to TikTok. Like we were probably like one of the first outlets in the state to really embrace it, and which has given us a head start on everyone else. Like I see the Register is playing catch up on it. Iowa Public Radio has a pretty good TikTok as well, but like we kind of like jumped ahead of the curve on it, and so like we got nearly 40,000 followers on there. And what we do is we do a mixture of kind of explainer videos, like explaining this policy or this legislation or what this does, mixed with raw footage of legislators talking about policy on the floor, various video interviews, like things like that. We also have a couple of influencers that we partner with, and they kind of give TikTok videos summarizing our stories and then telling people where they can go read the rest of them at. So we're trying a different mix of things, and like being social first has been like extremely different for me, because like I'm, as you can see from my wall, like I have a heavy print background, so this is the first digital only outlet that I've worked for. And so, it's been a learning curve, but like what's been nice about it is that like, with a lot of traditional outlets, it's like trying to move a cruise ship to turn it around. Whereas like us, we're more like a speedboat, because we're digital first. We can change things rapidly.
So tell us what the key issues are in this election year for Iowa voters. I'm assuming that many of them are connected to maybe agriculture, but
You would think, but no.
tell us, tell us.
So, I spent a lot of time on the Republican caucus trail, before Trump cemented the thing on, what was it, January 15th? So I attended a lot of events, and the things that I would hear that talked about the most often, the U.S. southern border. So U.S. southern border / immigration. What else? The economy. Like those are the two things I heard about the most from Republican voters. Now I know with Democratic voters, reproductive rights is probably the top of mind for everyone. And so you obviously got very contrasting views right there on what's the most important thing in this big election coming up. But I mean, and it's kind of like you're seeing a lot more of like the nationalization of even local politics, because you see state level and even some county level candidates who don't run on local platforms. They run on whatever Fox News talking points, or whatever, like like you see a lot more of that versus people talking about the actual issues that should matter to the people in those communities. And that's very disheartening. Because yeah,
Well,
like you think it'd be agriculture, but no.
well, another thing I wanted to ask you about was the issue of education in the state. One of your recent stories was highlighting that the fact that a Trump appointee who has no background as a teacher or in a classroom is now running the state education department. So tell us where voters are, what people in Iowa think about that.
This is coinciding with a huge change to how special education is provided in the state. So we have these things called area education agencies. And the governor just signed a huge bill that was like the topic of this legislative session that is going to completely overhaul how these things are going on. And they've been in place since the 70s. They were actually started by a previous Republican trifecta to ensure that all Iowa schools had equal access to educational materials and services. So this bill is going to drastically change those over the next couple of years. Like some of them may end up folding. And Snow, Mackenzie Snow, our new director of education, obviously she's a former Trump appointee. She's also been very big in the school choice movement, which is what they call, providing public subsidies for private school tuition. Like, so whenever you hear school choice, like you already have a choice about which school to go to. School choice is just a fancy way of framing saying using taxpayer dollars for private school education. That's all it is. And so, we're going to see how that shapes out. I mean, the governor was huge on pushing, her voucher program last year, which got, made into law. This year is the first year. And we've already seen like more money than expected going toward that program. And so, like, a lot of fears from public education advocates and Democratic lawmakers I've spoken to is that the state is moving toward an effort to privatize education in the state. And so, like, when you get someone like Mackenzie Snow, who doesn't have that public school experience and who has, mostly been a behind the scenes kind of policy wonk, and who's very close to Betsy DeVos, who's used her family's resources to, further this privatization of education in the country. It's a lot of red flags, and a lot of people are seeing those red flags and kind of calling them out. And it's been very interesting that, like, Republican lawmakers have continued to push forward with making these changes that, people seem to be pushing back against, because in the fall we had school board elections and just about all of the Moms for Liberty type candidates in the state lost. Like, just about all of them, even in like very rural areas, even in very red areas, some of those toss-up suburban districts they lost. And so you're seeing the people saying one thing, but then you're seeing the people in charge saying another thing and doing another thing. And it doesn't seem to be that they are listening to what the people are telling them.
Let me ask you about January 6th. What was the conversation around that event in Iowa circles? Ongoing.
Yeah. So thankfully for me, I was very relieved because so January 6th is when I had a transitionary period. I had left my previous reporting job and I was getting ready to start my communications job. And so I was off that day. And I was just like on Twitter and on TV, like, what am I watching? Like, this feels like the segments you see on other countries that are documented on American news, like not something that happens here in America. So it is very, very interesting here because, obviously everyone was appalled by January 6th at the time. But like Iowa, just like a lot of America, again, that has become a partisan thing where you see some people, who are more left and center who are appalled and like disgusted by January 6th and like think it was like one of the worst things that ever happened to our country. And then you have some people on the right who were like, calling them the J6 defendants and, saying that they were unfairly treated and, it wasn't an insurrection and it wasn't this and that. And so again, it's just one of those issues that's become politically divided, which, was wild because, for that one day or so in the aftermath, it seemed like everyone was on board with like, hey, this is a terrible thing that shouldn't happen. This should not be how in our country, this should not be how things are decided. This should not be how you resolve an issue you have. Like, and of course, like everything else, it's just a partisan issue that, whichever way you align is the way you feel about it.
Let me pivot here and ask you about what my perception is of the past 5 years or so in America, the so-called racial reckoning, the backlash against DEI. We're in a really sort of tense moment in our history right now. You, as an African-American man, as a journalist, covering the confluence of all this, because it feels like the election is really going to bring it all to a head. What are your personal priorities in reporting this year? The topics that you want to cover that you need to elevate for your audience?
For me, I think it's just like, hey, here's what these people are said or are saying. Listen to them. Don't be like, oh, the media is, taking this out of context of that. It's like, no, if this person is saying what they're saying, listen to them. Here are the words coming from their mouth. They are saying they hate, I mean, what's been really interesting to me is that, like, Trump has been not shy about saying what he would do with another term. I mean, if you Google Project 2025, his allies and advocates have not been shy about what they plan to do in the second term. And for a lot of people reading that stuff, it sounds kind of scary. They're talking about rolling back a lot of rights for a lot of people. And of course, you have some people who are just kind of, very much like, they're both old, they're all things are the same. And it's like, no, man, like, one person is talking about, protecting rights, and one person is talking about eradicating them. And yes, they are both old. Like, we can't shy away from that. And so I think one thing is just going to be really challenging for me in this election is just kind of like telling people like what is happening, what each candidate stands for, and where you can find out more information about this, because sometimes you folks just want to go directly to that source instead of having to be a middle person like us.
I want to open it up to questions, so please get ready to ask Ty some questions. But I have one more before we jump into that, and that is I have to ask you to talk about your run-in with the DeSantis campaign. In so many of my conversations or our conversations with fellows, uh, speakers have given us insights into very difficult situations that they've endured or experienced. Or one, for example, was Yin-Chi Shu of the Flatwater Free Press, when the governor sort of called her out and dismissed her reporting because she was Chinese national. So set that up for us. Tell us what happened and how you've dealt with it.
Yeah, absolutely. So, as I mentioned, I was covering the Iowa caucus. It's kind of this huge deal. All the presidential candidates coming across the state, going to various small towns, going to the state fair, eating corn dogs, all that jazz. They're going to pander. They're going to pander all over the place. And so, I've been covering the DeSantis campaign for a few months, going to all his events because if you remember, at one point in time, he was like, "Oh man, this guy might be throwing Trump for the GOP's top dog." I mean, obviously that didn't happen, and it didn't happen very badly. But so I've been covering his events. I covered like 7 or 8 events, and then the day before he was set to make his state fair appearance, he had 3 events scheduled all over in rural Iowa. So a colleague of mine who flew in from Michigan to help us out cover the state fair, because again, we all these presidential candidates going to the state fair, we only have so many bodies locally to cover them all, and so that Friday, he and I were going to go to the DeSantis events and, get stories, get videos, get photos, all that jazz. So we go to the first event in Atlantic, Iowa. We asked like, hey, where can we sit? Where can we sit at? They're like, oh, go sit over there, wherever. We're like, cool. So, we sit, we're getting videos, I'm taking notes, we're taking photos, all that kind of stuff. And I told him like, okay, when he does like the meet and greets at the end, get in there, get close, to try to get a lot of videos of his interactions with people and all that kind of stuff. And so that starts after he gets done with his speech. And my coworker is like far, far, far away on the back wall. And I'm like, yo, why is he all the way over there? And so I'm like, okay, well, let me just get in there. DeSantis is not a big guy, so it's easy for me to like, stand over the crowd and like shoot down on him and catch his interactions. And so I'm doing that, I'm doing my thing. And as I'm doing that, this one security guy who's about as big as DeSantis keeps walking in front of me. And at the time, I didn't realize it. I thought like, oh, I must be getting in his way. Let me go move. And so I moved several times. And then the guy's like right there. I'm like, okay, this is weird. And so once he gets back on the bus, I started walking towards the the merch table, like to meet up with my coworker. And the same guy walks by, and again, he's not subtle, and he goes boop boop and snaps some photos of us. And I'm like, okay, that's not a good sign. I'm like, yo, what happened to you? He told me that security told him to get all the way over there, and he wasn't allowed to get any closer. And so I'm like, oh man, that's not great. Okay. So I call my boss, kind of like, hey, something's up with the DeSantis campaign. They were acting really, really weird. He's like, okay, just go to the next event and see what happens. So we head to the next event, and as we're pulling up, I see they have sheriff's deputies cars there. And I'm like, I know they ain't for us. I know they are not here for us. I know they're not here for us. And I just kind of start laughing to myself because I'm like, this would happen to me. And so I park, we start walking toward them. And as we're crossing the grass to get toward the event, the deputies come up and they're like, hey, they don't want you here. You can't come. And I'm like, what? And so like the whole thing is captured on video. And here's the thing. I know in my head, I see, law enforcement officials with guns and my big black ass in rural Iowa. I need to stay calm. I can't get angry. I can't get mad. I got to be chill. My coworker who joined me, he's a white guy, so he was like, he was pushing buttons. I was not. And so, like, I knew I had to keep my cool in that situation. And so we see that one of the campaign guys, he's hiding behind. So you got the law enforcement officials there, you got the private security behind the law enforcement officials, and then you have the campaign guy. And I'm like, we're registered to come here. And I got my registration up. He's like, doesn't matter. And I'm just like, what's going on? And so we got turned away. They had law enforcement there to prevent us from going in. And so, obviously the sidewalk is public ground, but I went back closer to my car to go call my boss real quick. My coworker decided to stand on the sidewalk where they were, where he was like, this is a public area. I can stand here, and just kept recording them while that was happening. And so then he tells me while I went to the car to go call my boss real quick, he said they were looking for me. Like they started like searching around the building, thought I was trying to sneak in from the back or something. And it was wild. Obviously this thing, blew up. Did some national interviews on that. It was a very surreal moment, and it's kind of wild because we never got an explanation for it. And it's like, okay, my guy, like, who, like, all right, if you thought, like, I did hear off the record from someone that they thought we were like, political watchers, but it's like, all right, one, I've been to so many of these other events too. Okay, why would you send me to be a political watcher in rural Iowa? Why would you do that? Like, if you're trying to, spy on a campaign event, why would you send me?
Yeah.
So that is a very, very flimsy excuse if that's what it was, especially when I'm the only Black journalist who covers politics in Iowa full time. And I'm
Listen,
also,
let me ask you about this theme that we're hearing so often now in across media, which is we're in a fight for American democracy right now. We really are in terms of access to news and access to information. So, do you feel that what the Iowa Starting Line is doing and other types of publications are really confronting that and addressing that issue? Because uh, the parallel is an organization called the Colorado Sun over this past weekend, and what a woman journalist was turned away from the Republican state assembly meetings. So feels like this is happening more and more often.
it is. I mean, and that's like, if you got nothing to hide, why keep the press out? you know Clearly something you're doing isn't on the up and up, or you don't think that the public would be too receptive to hearing what you're saying and what you're talking about, or what you want to be as part of your platform. So we're seeing a lot more gatekeeping from these public officials to the media, and like that's going to require us to get even better at being able to tell these stories without access. So like, public records, learning how to use them, learning how to use the courts. Those are the things that are going to really help you tell these stories, especially as access continues to be more and more limited and restricted. Cultivating relationships with good sources who are plugged in. Like things like that are what's going to help you tell these stories about what is happening in our country. Because yeah, sometimes these direct officials, like, you just can't get to them anymore, and that should
Let's see
be.
if there are any questions. Any hands raised? Anybody would like to speak with Ty here? Um, Hold on. Oh, yes, Sarah. Sarah, go ahead. Introduce yourself, please.
Hi, I'm Sarah Elvishbishi. I cover energy and the environment in West Virginia. Um, so I just covered, we just finished our legislative session, only for more to come. And I'm curious how like how you think, especially on like a local and state level, when we're seeing inflammatory and dangerous and racist rhetoric, whether it's, in terms of like the bills and the legislation or just like comments made. We had a whole like situation around the Crown Act in West Virginia. A legislator. Fortunately, we have a Black reporter covering that. She knew like so she was able to really be able to cover it extensively and like ask the right questions. But we just had like a senator hold it up because he was like, this is going to cost the state so much money. But anyways, so as we see kind of like blatant and then indirect like rhetoric like that, what do you see our role in, ensuring that we're covering it, but not doing it, but doing our due diligence? I think sometimes we see, especially on like a national platform, we see folks kind of covering, some of these inflammatory remarks and rhetoric in a way that can kind of almost encourage it instead of kind of being like, this happened, but we need to kind of there's a fine line. And so I think what do you think our role is and how do we make sure that we're playing that line without, encouraging it?
Well, so, we got to cover it. We got to call it out, but then we also have to explain why it's problematic. And I think that third step is often what gets lost in translation. So here in Iowa, we had the book bans last year. And so like I would always include a sentence like, okay, the impetus for a lot of these book bans, it's a lot of books that are written by Black and or LGBTQ authors. That's what a lot of these book bans, like this is who it's targeting. This is who it's affecting. These are the works that are being cited as a reason we need this book ban law. And so like, being very being very direct in what's happening, like, explaining it to people, saying like, okay, because it's one thing to be like, oh, this is problematic, and then like just leave it at that. But if you say it's problematic and here's why, that goes a longer way, especially with so many people who maybe aren't as attuned to the issues or like why something is a problem or why something is a challenge, like because maybe the senator didn't understand why the Crown Act was necessary. Like if the Crown Act would have been in place, 20 years ago, I could have got a job at a local theme park, but I couldn't because I had braids. And so like little things like that. And so like that's what the cool part about having diversity in your newsrooms is. And if you actually listen to it and use it, is that people can explain why, hey, you may not know anything about this, but here's why this affects that particular community in this way.
Can I ask a quick follow-up?
Sure.
Yeah, absolutely.
Have you ever gotten like pushback on doing that though? And then how do you kind of go about?
Yeah, absolutely.
How do you go about being like, yeah, if we're gonna do this, we have to do that third step?
Honestly, you got to learn to tune people out. I mean, like in social media, it makes it so much easier for people to harass and target journalists. And you can't be afraid to block or mute. And you got to block and mute a lot, especially right now. If you write a report on any social issue, there's a certain segment of the population who's going to get really, really mad. You can have the most benign thing, but if it mentions, the LGBTQ community or Black or this, you're going to get the, why is it about race? I like those people, but why can't they just keep it in the bedroom? Like you're going to hear that kind of stuff. And you just got to be like, whatever. Like you can't let them be in the back of your mind when you're trying to do your job and tell a story and tell a story accurately and truthfully. Like, so you kind of like, you got to ignore the haters because they're always going to be there. So I got called a Black agitator for writing about, no, I got called a Black agitator who was educated in the Kansas City public school system for writing about race and racism and my experiences with it. And so one of my editors was like, the Black agitator, that's your superhero name. And so if you go to my Twitter account, you'll see that's my pinned tweet because like my graphic designers heard that too. And they're like, yeah, let's make them a comic book cover for it. And so, sometimes you just got to like turn those L's or like the perceived L's into W's. I mean, I got called an ultra racist, which was kind of funny because it's like, I'm an ultra racist, but I'm so racist that I live in Iowa. Like, I hate white people so much. I decided to live in one of the whitest states in the country and surround myself with nothing but them because I hate them. That doesn't make any sense. And so you can't take some of that stuff to heart because those people are always going to be there. And then for us, negativity always swirls around your head way more than the positive comment. You could write a story with 99 positive comments, and that one negative comment is going to be the one you look at and just kind of like resonate on, like, dang, what was it that I did? And just you just got to focus on doing your job and doing it well. And honestly, I try to stay even keel. I don't let praise get me too high. I don't try to get too high, or I don't try to get too low. I try to stay right there in the middle and just focus.
Hi, I'm Bianca Kilantan, and I'm Politico's education reporter. I was wondering, since there are so many campaigns that go through Iowa, every 4 years, how do you, or like, what are your tips for sourcing within those campaigns? Since, they all come to your state, right? So who do you reach out to first, and how do you make those connections?
The funny thing about living in Iowa is they reach out to you first. Like the really good campaigns, they'll reach out to you first. Like they're kind of thirsty. They are very thirsty. I remember, so like, one of the things I liked, so I'm at a statewide outlet now, but one of the things I enjoyed about being at a local outlet is that I didn't have to hit the trail. Like if you come into my coverage area, absolutely we're going to cover you, but we're not going to like go out of our way to cover you because I still have to cover everything else that's happening in our community that the people are paying, my newspaper for. And so I remember the Booker campaign in 2019. They were like, oh yeah, we're gonna have this event, like it was like 30 minutes outside of our cover. No, it was like they were taking a Western Iowa swing and it was outside of our coverage area. I'm like, hey, you got this outside of our coverage area, like there's nothing much I can do about that. And they were like, we want you to ride on the bus with Corey. We'll go on this full swing with him, and we'll have someone drive your car behind the bus so that you can hang out on there on the bus and interview Corey and go to all these various events with him. And then you'll have your car to be able to go back home at the end of it. And I was like, as tempting as that is, like I can't waste it. I can't wipe an entire full day of reporting on my day-to-day stuff to cover something that's happening outside of my coverage area. And so yeah, if you're covering the campaigns and you're based in Iowa, they'll find you. Like they'll those campaign people, those flag stake, they are on top of it. Like they ain't no way I'm letting the campaign staffer drive my car, right? But they'll find you. Like it doesn't take much because like they're on the lookout for media people. Like they'll find you. All of a sudden, you'll start getting all these follows on Twitter from all these people, team, campaign XYZ. Like, yeah, trust me, they'll be there.
Ty, you strike me as somebody who has probably a very strong positive energy in your personality, a very affable person, a person who's accessible. And I just wonder what advice you would give to a young journalist of color who might have some trauma issues of dealing with racism or in another setting.
Yeah.
Iowa is somewhat rarefied as we've come to that conclusion. But how does one navigate a setting where it might not have those kinds of aspects to them, and how do you deal with that?
Honestly, you just kind of got to put yourself out there, like, and especially when we've had these very traumatic experiences, when we've had these negative experiences where you've been called some sort of name, or you felt people look at you. You still got to put yourself out there, and honestly, people can, they feel the vibes that you're putting out there. And so, I mean, I've written about and talked about race and racism in this state, and I've done it in very conservative areas where maybe a lot of people aren't so receptive to that message, but I've done it, and then I've still been able to go talk to them or other people about other issues and things that are happening in our community. Like I remember in 2020, I gave a speech. Like my small town had a BLM rally, and I spoke. And then I walked by the police chief afterwards and was like talking to him for a couple of minutes. He was standing outside, and then he kind of looks at me. He goes, we're not out here because of you guys. We're out here because the other people who, are upset you guys are having this event. And I thought that was really cool. Like he didn't have to go out of his way to say that, because like if I see the police outside of a BLM rally, I understand, especially in rural Iowa. But like, he went out there to he went out of his way to clarify that to me. And, that's because, we had this relationship like for a while, like I've worked with him, kind of cultivated that bond. And so that was kind of like, it was a little thing, but it went a long way. And so, yeah, just putting yourself out there and giving it a shot, giving it a chance. I mean, shit, I didn't think I'd be in the Iowa for 11 years, but here I am. My wife is here. We both got good jobs. I mean, have no intention of leaving anytime soon.
Almaz has a question. Go right ahead.
Hey Ty, I'm Almaz. I'm a social video producer at AP based in DC. You talked about how your news org was the first out of kind of the local Midwest outlets to start a TikTok. So I was just wondering what those kind of conversations were like when you or maybe someone in your newsroom first like introduced the idea, and if there was like maybe pushback to move into sort of like a newer and often like unpredictable space, or did it kind of seem like everyone was on board?
Nah, that's like the beauty of like, our org is that, we're always looking for new ways to reach people. And then even before the entire Courier organization kind of like started putting more of an emphasis on TikTok, my boss had the idea. He was like, and this is like like summer of 2022. He was like, okay, we should probably be doing more on TikTok, especially because we know Meta, keeps de-emphasizing news for Facebook and Instagram. They keep tinkering with it. You see what's happening with Twitter now, where it's just kind of become this cesspool. And so, it was just kind of like we went for the gamble. And once we got another full-time social media person, we could put more emphasis on that. And so, we started out like we were covering Chuck Grassley town halls and then recording those and then like kind of putting some of the big moments from those town halls on TikTok. And then we started working with the influencers, so some local Iowa influencers who already kind of had a following on TikTok. So that when people saw their faces, they knew them. So we started working with them to have them like retell our stories. And then the legislative session last year is where we really kind of took off with it. And so, the proof was in the pudding. Like once you saw these numbers, when you got 90,000 views on a speech from a state lawmaker or, things like that, other people kind of got on board. And so like more of the Courier properties, there's 11 in total, are kind of copying the Iowa method of getting some of those lawmaker speeches or getting some of these speeches from subcommittees or committees or some of these testimonies or some of these political clips and things like that and kind of adding them to their own channels. So yeah, it wasn't much of a challenge to go for it. I mean, but I've been in newsrooms like that where, people are adverse to change. I mean, one of the newsrooms I was in, the president of the company wanted to add more digital content. Like he wanted more online exclusive content. And I came up with this idea called Take Five, which would be basically a reporter blog where everyone on staff would rotate. We do 5 a week and everyone would just kind of write about whatever they wanted to write about. It could be about pop culture stuff, could be about fun, just do whatever you wanted to do to flex your writing chops. And there was some apprehension at first for some of the writers, even my boss, the editor in chief, because he was like, "Well, these are stories we could just use in the paper," because it's very old school. And I'm just like, "Listen, let's give it a shot." And we gave it a shot. It helped drum some additional traffic to the website. That was paywall free, and we won a couple of awards for it too. So sometimes you just got to put yourself out there and try something new. And it's always hard to talk your bosses into it unless you have a boss who's very game to pivot.
We have one more question from Bradford.
Hey Ty, Bradford William Davis. I'm currently independent journalist. One question I have for you as someone who has been in Iowa political writing for a while and has experienced rural America. There's been a recent sort of reinvigorated debate and discussion about rural American politics and whether or not they're disproportionately aggressive in a way that's kind of holding the country back and so forth. And debate on both sides whether or not that's just an unfair singling out of say rural writers, or not rural writers, rural, hard word to repeat over and over again. Rural, American citizens. I'm just curious from your experience, are rural citizens being covered well and fairly in by their local and state and national media?
I mean, honestly, it depends on where you are. So when I was in Northwest Iowa, I worked for a robust, locally owned, family-owned publication. So we got to tell the hell out of the stories in our communities. We had 4 counties, 44 cities, and 17 school systems that we covered. And, we would have stories about what happened in this city council or what happened with this board of supervisors or changes that are happening in this school district. And we had all the sports every Friday night for all the football and all the basketball. So but every place doesn't have that same level of coverage or accountability or local news. And that's where so much stuff gets lost in translation. So, like, as we lose more and more news sources, some of these people definitely feel left out, and they're only getting their information from AM radio, which, a lot of times is right-wing and conservative talking points, or Fox News. And even when you go, to the gym or to the gas station, if the gas station has a TV or the gym has a TV, you'll see Fox News on there. Like, it's just like kind of always on in the background a lot of these places. And so when you get into a lot of places that have these local news deserts, that's why you don't, hear much about them or see much about the local issues. Everything becomes a national issue. That's why people in Iowa care so much about the U.S. southern border versus like, what's happening with ag subsidies or things like that, because this is what they're being exposed to. And so, a lot of times you see those communities kind of getting left in the dark, but then you also kind of see the hover, journalism from, people come in for the caucus and they visit a town for 5 minutes and they think they know everything about it. And they tell you about rolling hills and the local diner and the guys meet for coffee. And, that's just like it's obviously it's a part of the state and it's part of the culture and it's part of the people, but it's not the full story. And so like for me, it's a lived experience. Like I spent 5.5 years living in a town of 5,000 over 2 terms. And so like, I understand what it's like to live in a community that small. I understand what it's like to live in a place that feels misunderstood or left behind by the world. And I get that. Like, and that's one of the things I'm very privileged in having is that like I had, grew up in the city, grew up in a bigger city, and I have that background and that mindset, but I also know what it's like to live in that small town and to feel overlooked and not seen. And so like that's giving me a really unique perspective into my job. And it's like helped me do well because like, I got the urban and the rural experience.
We have had 3 fascinating opportunities today to hear from journalists who, as I say, brought their lived experience into their career, into their work on a daily basis. So, Ty, we had Tolu, who's the son of Nigerian American immigrants. We had Paulie, who is an indigenous journalist. And now we have you, an African American man from a large city moving to rural Iowa. So I'm going to ask you to take us home here on this last conversation of the day by asking you, do you feel it made a difference in you being an African American man in rural Iowa, in the issues and the topics that you cover? What difference has it made that you are the person interpreting issues and communicating them to the public?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I've been able to kind of use my voice and insight to kind of like, and it kind of sucks because sometimes you don't want to be the person who's the voice for everything or have to speak out on everything. But at the same time, it's like if you don't speak up or step up, who will? And so I remember being in a newsroom where I had to educate, several coworkers, my boss and my boss's boss about why we don't use the word, Oriental anymore, because there was a new restaurant that was opening in this small town and they were going to serve Chinese food. And, we had, they're going to have Oriental dishes in there. And I'm like, yo, no, we don't do that anymore. And they all thought it was fine. Like all these other people who saw the pages, like thought, no big deal about it. I'm like, no. And I sent like the article link explaining this, like, while that term is falling out of fashion and things like that. And, like if I wasn't there, we wouldn't have been able to have that. I wouldn't have been able to like, can I get that stopped or like educate them on this issue? Another example is one time I was talking to the wife of a rural, board of supervisors member, and he was always very he was very friendly to me. We had a very good rapport, and I met his wife for the first time, and she's like, meeting you really changed him. And I was like, oh, really? And then she was trying not to like say like, hey, he was a bit racist before he met me. But she was saying that without saying that. And she was like, because one time their daughter brought a friend home from school who looked a lot more like me. And apparently that didn't go well. And so I was just kind of like fascinated by that because I'm like, really? Jim was like that? Because like, again, we've had this good rapport. He's appreciated my reporting on the board, even when it doesn't paint him in a positive light, because I'm quoting something he said that may have been a little inflammatory during the meeting, but he respected the coverage because it was always accurate. It was always fair. And so I was just kind of blown away by that. Like, dang, just like, those interactions we've have, once a week on Tuesdays, and then the story he reads in the paper the following week, like, made that much of a difference over time. And, so like little situations like that, or like you see that blacked out front page right there behind me. So in 2020, we ran an all black front page about, it said Black Lives Matter. And, the 4th district of Iowa, that's where Steve King's old stomping grounds used to be at, for those who don't know. And so that wasn't even my idea. That was our graphic designers came up with that, because it was like our issue where we covered the local protests, and it was kind of like, all those stories in there. And I cried when I saw it. I cried when they showed me, because I just came in late that day and I saw it and just like cried in the newsroom. Very embarrassing. But it was just like, they did that like because of me, and because like I've been able to explain to them what this means. Like, Black Lives Matter doesn't mean nobody else's lives matter. It means like, hey, these are our lives. We're the ones in danger. We're the ones in trouble. And so like the fact that my paper ran that, like a blacked out front page in the 4th district of Iowa, where Steve King was there, the representative for 20 years. And if you don't know anything about Steve King, Google him. Google him. You're gonna see a lot of stuff. And so yeah. I mean, putting myself out there, I'd say it's been very beneficial for me, but also for readers, colleagues, and friends that I've been able to make along the way.
I'm going to ask you to do us a favor. If you have a PDF version of that front page, please send it to me so that I can share it with the fellows, because your presentation today has been powerful and inspiring, and the positive energy that you bring to your work is inspirational. So Ty Rushing of Iowa Starting Line, thank you so much for being here with us today.
I appreciate it. Thanks for having me. Y'all been a great audience. Rachel, I got you anytime you need me.
All right. Well, you're definitely now on the roster. So we'll be in touch soon. Take care.